Welcome to Hauntales, where darkest stories come alive. I know many of you tune into these tales to drift off to sleep, so settle in, relax, and get comfortable. Whether you're lying in bed or curled up on the couch, let the whispers of these chilling encounters carry you away. Before we begin tonight's story, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more spine-tingling tales, and let me know in the comments where are you listening from, and what time is it. I love seeing how far our stories travel. For the best experience, use your headphones, close your eyes, and let every word sink deep into your mind. Now we begin our stories for tonight. Nightbound. Iris Harrington was the heart of her family. At 21, she had always been the one to light up the room, her laughter ringing like chimes in the stillness of the Whitestone home. With dreams of becoming a writer, she spent her days scribbling stories and poems, losing herself in the world she created. Her imagination knew no bounds, and her vibrant personality attracted friends easily. However, the loss of her mother had cast a long shadow over her once sunny disposition. The bright-eyed young woman who would weave tales of adventure now found herself grappling with an overwhelming sense of loss, struggling to reclaim the spark that once defined her. Nadia Harrington, Iris's younger sister, was the opposite of her vibrant sibling. At 18, she had always been the quieter one, preferring the company of her sketches and paints over the bustling social scenes that Iris enjoyed. Art was her sanctuary, a way to express the emotions she often found difficult to voice. Since their mother's passing, Nadia had immersed herself in her art even more, creating haunting portraits that conveyed her grief and confusion. The joy she once found in painting was slowly being overshadowed by a haunting darkness, reflected in her choice of colors and the heaviness of her brushstrokes. Graham Harrington, their father, was a man defined by his craftsmanship. A skilled woodworker, he poured his heart and soul into his creations, each piece a reflection of his emotions. Following the death of his wife, Graham retreated further into his work, using the workshop as a refuge from the heartache that plagued his family. He rarely emerged, focusing on intricate designs that consumed his thoughts, neglecting the emotional connections that once held their family together. In his isolation, he failed to notice the widening gap between himself and his daughters, the once close-knit family now frayed at the edges. Iris often found herself reminiscing about the time before their mother's death, longing for the warmth that had filled their home. Their mother was the glue that held them together, a nurturing presence who encouraged both daughters to pursue their passions. Iris could still hear her mother's laughter echoing through the halls, a sound that now seemed like a distant memory. After the tragedy, Iris felt compelled to fill the void, but her attempts often felt hollow. The warmth of their shared laughter had been replaced by an uncomfortable silence that weighed heavily on her heart. Nadia, on the other hand, grappled with her emotions through her art. She would spend hours alone in her room, sketching her feelings onto paper, transforming her pain into haunting images. Each brushstroke was a reflection of her turmoil, a testament to her internal struggle. Unlike Iris, who sought to reconnect with the world around her, Nadia withdrew deeper into herself, allowing her grief to manifest in her work. The sisters' once shared experiences faded, replaced by the chasm created by their differing ways of coping. One evening, Iris knocked on Nadia's door, hoping for a moment of connection. "Can we talk?" she ventured, her voice barely above a whisper. The reply came only after a heavy pause. Not now. The rejection stung, and Iris felt the familiar ache of helplessness swell within her. It was moments like these that underscored the growing distance between them. They were two ships passing in the night, both yearning for the other's presence yet afraid to reach out across the void that grief had carved. Graham was often oblivious to the strained relationship between his daughters. Lost in his own world of wood shavings and sawdust, he failed to see the subtle changes in Iris and Nadia. He assumed that, like him, they were coping with their grief in their own ways. He was determined to keep his family afloat, believing that hard work and dedication to his craft would somehow mend the fractures within their hearts. Yet, with every passing day, the gap widened, and the house grew colder, as if the very walls mourned the absence of their matriarch. As the weeks turned into months, Iris felt the burden of being the eldest daughter grow heavier. She worried about Nadia, watching her sister slip further into darkness, and felt an overwhelming need to protect her. Iris spent time organizing family activities, hoping to draw her sister out of her shell, but each effort was met with resistance. Nadia would retreat to her room, locking herself away, while Iris felt increasingly isolated, her concern morphing into frustration. She began to feel as though she was losing not only her mother but also her sister. Despite her attempts to reach out, the conversations Iris hoped for never materialized. The sisters would sit together in silence, the weight of unspoken words pressing heavily on their hearts. Iris often found herself yearning for the candid discussions they used to have, the secrets they would share under the stars. But now the nights were filled with an uncomfortable quiet, each moment stretching into eternity, filled only with the sound of their breathing. It was a painful reminder of how drastically their lives had changed since their mother's passing. In her solitude, Nadia began to channel her emotions into a series of dark sketches. The images that emerged from her pencil were often haunting figures shrouded in shadow, eyes wide with despair, landscapes that felt alien and cold. Each piece felt like a cry for help, a reflection of her internal battle, yet she hesitated to share them with Iris. The fear of judgment and misunderstanding held her back. Instead, she kept them hidden away, tucking them beneath her bed, a secret world where she could express her feelings without fear of rejection. One day, Iris stumbled upon one of Nadia's drawings, a haunting image of their mother, surrounded by darkness. The sight knocked the breath from her lungs, a visceral reminder of the pain they both shared. She felt a mixture of sorrow and anger. Why had Nadia chosen to retreat into such darkness? Iris longed to confront her sister, to express her concerns and find a way back to the light, but the fear of pushing Nadia further away held her back. Instead, she chose to remain silent, allowing the rift to grow even wider. Graham, unaware of the storm brewing within his daughters, continued to pour himself into his work. His workshop became a sanctuary, filled with the scent of freshly cut wood and the rhythmic sound of his tools. Each project was an attempt to create something beautiful amidst the chaos of his emotions. He crafted intricate designs and furniture, pouring his heart into each piece, yet the act of creation often felt futile. The absence of his wife lingered in every corner of the house, a ghost that refused to be forgotten. Despite the growing distance between them, there were fleeting moments when the sisters would share a laugh or a smile, memories of their mother shining through the cracks of their grief. On one particularly sunny afternoon, Iris suggested a picnic in the backyard, a simple yet nostalgic gesture. They sat on the grass, surrounded by remnants of their childhood, an old swing set and a weathered treehouse. For a brief moment, they were transported back to a time when life felt safe and filled with possibility. But as shadows lengthened, the heaviness of reality would inevitably creep back in. The challenges of their shared grief loomed over them like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over their lives in Whitestone. Both Iris and Nadia struggled with the emotions that swirled within them, unable to articulate the pain they felt. The conversations that should have bridged the gap remained unsaid, each sister trapped in her own spiral of sorrow. As they navigated their grief in parallel but separate worlds, the house echoed with the silence of what could have been, a poignant reminder of their mother's absence. With each passing day, Iris felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She wanted to be the strong one, the glue that would hold their family together, but the cracks were beginning to show. In moments of solitude, she would curl up with a book, seeking solace in stories that promised adventure and happiness. Yet, the more she read, the more she realized how far removed her reality had become. The tales of triumph and love seemed like distant fantasies, unable to penetrate the thick fog of despair that hung over their home. Nadia, too, found herself battling the tide of emotions that threatened to engulf her. She would sometimes catch a glimpse of the vibrant girl she once was in the mirror, but the reflection was fleeting, replaced by the weight of grief that clung to her like a shroud. In the quiet moments of the night, she would sketch, pouring her heart onto the page, trying to make sense of the chaos within. Each drawing was a silent testament to her struggle, a reflection of the turmoil that bubbled just beneath the surface. As autumn approached, the air in Whitestone grew crisp, the leaves turning vibrant shades of orange and gold. The change in season felt symbolic, a reminder that life continued even in the face of loss. Iris would often sit by the window, watching the leaves dance in the wind, contemplating how to reach out to Nadia. The thought of addressing the elephant in the room loomed large, but the fear of shattering the fragile peace kept her quiet. Instead, she hoped that time would heal their wounds, unaware that the darkness lurking just beyond their front door was about to alter the course of their lives forever. As night descended upon Whitestone, a disquieting stillness settled over the Harrington home. The soft hum of the outside world faded into silence, and the shadows lengthened, creeping across the rooms. Iris had just finished her sketches for the day when she caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. Her heart skipped a beat as she squinted into the darkness, but all she saw was the vague outline of a figure disappearing behind the tall trees lining their property. She shook her head, attributing the fleeting sight to her overactive imagination, yet a gnawing unease settled in her stomach. Later that evening, Nadia entered the living room to find a family photo on the floor, the frame cracked and the glass shattered. It had been hanging perfectly just hours before, and the sudden damage sent a chill down her spine. As she picked up the pieces, her gaze drifted to the window, where the streetlights cast an eerie glow over the yard. In the dim light, she thought she saw something move near the edge of the trees, just a flicker, like a wisp of smoke that vanished before her mind could register it fully. Her pulse quickened, and she glanced around, feeling the oppressive weight of the quiet home. Graham, seeking to maintain order amidst the mounting tension, decided to check the perimeter of the property. He stepped outside, the cool air wrapping around him as he walked along the familiar path, scanning the darkened yard. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, lurking just beyond the range of his vision. He peered into the shadows, searching for any sign of movement, but found nothing. The trees loomed silently, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze, offering no hints of the lurking presence that had begun to seep into their lives. Returning inside, Graham felt an unsettling knot forming in his stomach. As he turned to check on his daughters, he noticed that the living room felt emptier than before, the air thick with an unnameable tension. He stood for a moment, listening intently, but the silence pressed in on him, amplifying his unease. As he walked toward the kitchen, he thought he saw a fleeting shadow dart across the wall, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there, only the familiar furnishings of their home. That night, as the family settled in, Iris felt restless. The whispers of the night tugged at her, drawing her to the window once more. She stood, peering outside, her breath fogging the glass as she searched for any signs of life beyond the warm glow of their home. For a fleeting moment, she thought she spotted a figure standing in the distance, half hidden behind a tree, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Confused and unsettled, she stepped back, heart racing at the thought of being so close to something she couldn't comprehend. The next morning, as the family gathered for breakfast, an eerie stillness hung in the air, thicker than usual. Nadia noticed a scratch on the door frame leading to the backyard, deep and jagged, as if something had clawed at it. She couldn't remember seeing it there before. Puzzled, she ran her fingers along the rough edges, her mind racing with questions. Had someone attempted to break in? Or was it simply an accident? The uncertainty gnawed at her, adding to the collective anxiety that had started to permeate their home. Graham's instinct kicked in, prompting him to check the outdoor cameras once more. He scrolled through the footage, focusing on the moments leading up to the previous evening. The images flickered across the screen, showing the familiar sights of their yard, the swaying trees, the fence line, and the distant street. As he fast-forwarded, a subtle movement caught his eye, a shadow that flickered briefly in the corner of the frame. He paused, heart pounding, but when he played it back in real time, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. The frustration of not knowing began to seep in, intensifying his worry. While Graham examined the footage, Iris took it upon herself to survey the backyard. She stepped outside, determination etched across her features. The morning light revealed the same trees, the same shadows that had haunted her dreams. As she walked the perimeter, the sensation of being watched returned, prickling at the back of her neck. She glanced over her shoulder frequently, convinced that something lurked just beyond her line of sight, watching her every move with intent. Nadia joined her outside, sharing the palpable unease that seemed to bind them together. As they walked, Nadia pointed toward a spot beneath a tree where the grass had been flattened, as if someone had been sitting there. They exchanged worried glances, both aware of the unspoken tension in the air. They crouched down to examine the ground, their fingers brushing against the damp earth. The footprints were too small to belong to an adult, yet they were unmistakably human. As the day wore on, Graham's frustration grew. He checked the cameras repeatedly, hoping for a sign of what had been happening outside their home. Each time, he was met with the same uneventful footage, only the trees swaying gently in the wind, the occasional car passing by on the street. Yet, in the back of his mind, a growing sense of dread urged him to dig deeper. The notion that something was amiss clawed at him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was encroaching on their lives in ways he could not yet understand. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the tension reached a new peak. The family gathered in the living room, their unease palpable as they tried to enjoy each other's company. The shadows danced around them, creeping closer as the light faded. Iris glanced at the window, convinced she saw movement again, just a flicker, a shadow stretching across the grass outside. But when she leaned closer, she found only darkness staring back, swallowing the light. Later, as they prepared for bed, Graham felt a sudden urge to check the perimeter once more. He stepped outside, the chill of the night air biting at his skin. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting and turning like skeletal fingers. He scanned the yard with a heightened sense of awareness, desperate to find something, anything that could explain the growing tension within their home. But the only sound was the rustling leaves, and the darkness felt thick, wrapping around him like a cloak. In the quiet of their rooms, each family member lay awake, caught in the web of their unspoken fears. Iris couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting just outside, lingering in the shadows, while Nadia replayed the image of the mysterious footprints in her mind. Graham, pacing the floor, felt the weight of his family's safety pressing down on him, an unrelenting burden he couldn't ignore. Each creak of the house echoed in the silence, a reminder that they were not alone, even if they couldn't see the source of their dread. As the hours ticked by, the night stretched on, heavy with anticipation and unknowing. The Harrington home stood at the edge of something undefined, a threshold where shadows blurred the line between reality and the unknown. The haunting presence that had begun to invade their lives was not easily seen or understood, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to reveal itself fully. Each member of the family lay in their beds, hearts racing, sensing that whatever was hidden in the darkness was drawing closer, ready to make its presence known in a way they could never have imagined. The Harrington home was swallowed by the night, its windows glowing faintly against the thick blanket of darkness that enveloped Whitestone. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. Iris lay curled beneath her covers, her mind racing as memories of her mother flickered like ghosts in the corners of her thoughts. The room, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and light, now felt claustrophobic, the shadows growing longer and more menacing as the hour grew late. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering in from the street lamp outside, she noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. A movement in the far corner caught her attention, and she turned her head slowly, straining to discern what lurked just beyond her sight. There, in the shadowed recesses, something stood, a dark figure blending seamlessly with the surrounding gloom. It felt like an electric pulse in the air, as if the atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension. The figure was vaguely humanoid but indistinct, its form blurred and elusive. Heart pounding, Iris fought the urge to pull the covers over her head, unwilling to give in to fear. She blinked hard, trying to focus, to make sense of the apparition. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure slipped away, dissolving into the darkness, as if it had never been there at all. In a surge of panic, she reached for the lamp on her nightstand, her fingers trembling against the cool switch. When the light burst forth, illuminating every corner of her room, Iris felt a mix of relief and confusion. Nothing was amiss, no sign that something had been there, only the familiar trappings of her life. She lay back, breathless, trying to rationalize the experience. Surely it was a trick of the mind, a shadow cast by her own grief and fatigue. Yet, the unease clung to her, refusing to dissipate, as if it had settled into the very fabric of her being. Days morphed into weeks, each one carrying the weight of her unspoken fears. Iris often found herself glancing into dark corners, half expecting to see that figure again. She sought comfort in the bustling chaos of school, surrounded by friends who seemed blissfully unaware of the shadows creeping into her life. Yet, no matter how bright the day, the darkness felt like a persistent specter, looming just beyond her reach. One weekend, as dusk fell, Iris found herself at a friend's house, a welcome distraction from the oppressive weight of her own home. The chatter of laughter filled the air, the vibrant colors of the living room painting a stark contrast to her thoughts. As the night wore on and her friends began to tire, Iris stepped outside to catch her breath. The backyard was bathed in silver moonlight, the stars twinkling overhead like distant promises of safety. Yet as she stood in the cool night air, an unsettling feeling crept up her spine, prickling her skin like static electricity. She scanned the shadows, the trees swaying gently in the night breeze, but her gaze was drawn to a corner of the yard where the light barely reached. There, just beyond the edge of illumination, a figure stirred. It was familiar yet haunting, echoing the apparition from her room. As she squinted into the darkness, Iris felt a visceral pull, an inexplicable urge to step closer, to understand what she was seeing. But the moment she moved, the figure vanished, swallowed by the night, as if it had never existed. An unsettling chill washed over her, and she shook her head, chastising herself for letting her imagination run wild. She turned to head back inside, trying to dismiss the encounter as a trick of the mind. Later that night, as the group settled into a movie, the projector flickered, and the room was abruptly plunged into darkness. The sudden silence was deafening, the absence of light turning every shadow into a lurking threat. In that heavy stillness, Iris felt a rush of panic, her heart racing as she instinctively reached for the armrest, gripping it tightly. It was in that moment of utter blackness that she saw it again, a fleeting shape at the periphery of her vision, watching, waiting. The entity lingered just beyond the beam of her friend's cell phone light, its form indistinct yet undeniably present. The air felt charged, electric with the unvoiced terror that enveloped her. Just as the sense of dread threatened to consume her, the lights flickered back on, banishing the darkness and the entity from her sight. Laughter erupted around her, oblivious to the shiver that had crawled down her spine. Back at home, the encounters began to weave themselves into her nightly routine, each encounter more chilling than the last. Night after night, Iris lay in bed, heart racing as she stared into the darkness, waiting for the figure to appear again. Her once cozy sanctuary now felt like a battleground, each corner of her room a potential hiding spot for the entity that seemed to thrive on her fear. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, a prickling sensation that crept along her skin and settled into her bones. In the quiet moments, when the world was still, she could almost hear its presence breathing just beyond her reach. The fleeting glimpses became more frequent, each one adding to the tapestry of unease that enveloped her life. With each sighting, she became acutely aware of the darkness that surrounded her, its depths growing thicker, more impenetrable. Nadia, too, felt the weight of the shadows creeping into her life. During a movie outing with friends, the theater was suddenly plunged into darkness. The film abruptly halted. In that heavy silence, Nadia experienced a familiar dread, a tightness in her chest that felt all too familiar. Just beyond the flickering glow of her friends' phones, she caught a glimpse of the entity, its shape hovering at the edge of the light, a mere whisper of something that felt both sinister and strangely compelling. The power returned, flooding the theater with light and laughter, but the figure remained imprinted in her mind. It was a shadow of a memory that refused to fade, a reminder that something was watching, something real. As the days turned into nights, the sisters began to sense a connection between their experiences, a shared understanding of the dark presence that loomed just outside their line of sight. The entity became a silent intruder in their lives, a specter lurking in the corners of their existence. With every encounter, the boundary between their reality and the darkness thinned, the weight of the unknown settling like a fog over their hearts. Iris and Nadia began to draw closer, united by their fear and the unspoken truth that lingered between them. In the hours before dawn, as the world slept, the entity thrived, a relentless reminder of the shadows that encroached upon their lives. Iris felt its presence like a shroud, wrapping itself around her thoughts, and the memories of laughter and light began to dim, overshadowed by the weight of the darkness that followed her. Each night was a test of courage, the fight between light and dark growing ever more tenuous. The once vibrant home felt increasingly like a prison, the walls closing in around them as they navigated the labyrinth of fear. In every flicker of light, every whisper of the night, Iris felt the entity beckoning, teasing at the edges of her consciousness. The shadows had woven themselves into the fabric of her life, leaving her in a constant state of unease, a battle between the light that offered safety and the darkness that promised secrets. The evening in Whitestone was uncharacteristically still, an unsettling calm settling over the house. Iris and Nadia sat in the living room, the faint glow from their phones casting long shadows against the walls. The air was thick with tension, a reminder of the unease that had followed them since their initial encounter. Just as they began to relax, a loud thud echoed from the hallway, shattering the silence and pulling them back into a state of alert. The noise felt unnatural, resonating in a way that sent a chill down their spines. They exchanged anxious glances, uncertainty reflected in their wide eyes, the weight of unspoken fears hanging between them. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out completely, leaving them in an enveloping darkness that felt alive. Stumbling through the pitch black, they desperately searched for their phones, hoping to use their small screens as a guide. The shadows twisted around them, no longer familiar but filled with an ominous presence that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. Nadia clutched Iris's arm, their connection grounding them against the encroaching fear. As they moved cautiously through the darkness, an unsettling sensation crept into their bones, as if they were being watched. Suddenly the power surged back to life, only to go out again almost immediately, each blackout leaving them more disoriented than the last. The atmosphere in the room shifted, a palpable sense of foreboding hanging in the air, thickening like fog. Just then, Iris caught a glimpse of a figure lurking at the edge of her vision, a distorted humanoid shape that seemed to melt into the shadows. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving her breathless and more frightened than before. They decided to check the kitchen, their instincts screaming that something was amiss. As they entered, the fridge door swung wide open, the contents littering the floor in chaotic disarray. An oppressive weight filled the air, and the shadows seemed to pulse with an energy that felt foreboding. The unmistakable sound of shuffling echoed behind them, and they turned to find the figure standing there, much closer now. It was an abomination of a creature, its features twisted and grotesque, sending waves of primal fear coursing through them. Before they could react, it lunged at Iris, its cold, clammy hands grasping her wrist with an iron grip. Pain shot through her as she struggled, feeling the creature's fingers digging into her skin, leaving behind angry red marks. The shock of its touch made her gasp, her heart racing as she fought against its hold. Nadia screamed, panic igniting her as she darted towards her sister. In a desperate attempt to save Iris, she lunged at the entity, hoping to pull her away, but the creature was stronger than it appeared. With a swift motion, it twisted, sending Nadia sprawling backward against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, and she struggled to regain her footing, her vision blurring from the sudden pain. Iris fought against the entity's grip, her heart pounding in her chest as she struggled to break free. The creature's eyes glinted with an unsettling intelligence, devoid of any empathy as it tightened its hold. Nadia fought through the pain and finally snapped into action, her instincts pushing her to find a light source. Desperation fueled her movements as she fumbled with a nearby flashlight, her hands shaking uncontrollably. With trembling fingers, she flicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness and illuminating the creature's contorted face. The entity recoiled, letting out a guttural shriek that reverberated in the small kitchen, a sound that felt both alien and horrifyingly familiar. In that moment, Iris wrenched her wrist free, adrenaline surging as they dashed toward the front door. As they bolted for the exit, the entity lunged again, its grasp narrowly missing Iris as she ducked beneath its outstretched arm. Their feet pounded against the hardwood floor, echoing in the otherwise silent house, every beat of their hearts synchronized with their desperate escape. Outside, they stood together in the cool night air, shivering from fear and adrenaline, desperately trying to comprehend what had just happened. In a whirlwind of panic, they dialed the police, their voices shaky as they recounted the horror they had encountered. The night sky felt oppressive above them, each star obscured by a thick veil of unease. As they waited for the officers to arrive, the chill of the night wrapped around them, amplifying their anxiety. When the police arrived, they cautiously entered the house, flashlights cutting through the lingering shadows. Iris and Nadia stood outside, shaking, recounting their experience to the officers, but the reality of their ordeal hung thick in the air. After a thorough search of the property, the police found nothing amiss, just an eerie calm enveloping the home. But as they examined the electrical panel, Concern spread across their faces. The power breaker was damaged, wires exposed, hinting at a struggle that had left its mark on their home. Iris and Nadia exchanged anxious glances, the realization that something had manipulated the very fabric of their reality sinking in. Just then, their father returned from his walk, his casual demeanor clashing with the chaos inside the house. He walked in, his brow furrowing as he took in the sight of police officers and his daughter's distressed faces. Confusion washed over him as he tried to piece together the events that had unfolded in his absence. As the girls recounted their harrowing encounter, their hearts still raced, haunted by the memory of the entity. The darkness enveloped Iris and Nadia like a suffocating blanket as they stumbled into the kitchen, hearts pounding in their chests. Their breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a reminder of the terror that had just unfolded. The bright light from the overhead fixture seemed almost too harsh after the encounter, illuminating the aftermath of their fear. Bruises adorned their arms, remnants of the entity's grip, and the shock of the experience left them feeling exposed and vulnerable. Shadows danced along the walls, taunting them with remnants of the horror they had just escaped. Their minds raced, replaying the events over and over, as if searching for some glimmer of understanding amid the chaos. Every creak of the house made them jump, turning their heads quickly to scan for any signs of danger lurking in the corners. They exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the bond forged in their shared terror, each feeling the weight of the other's unspoken fear. Determination began to rise within them, pushing aside the paralysis of dread. They knew they had to uncover the truth about the entity that had invaded their lives. Sitting at the kitchen table, they spread out their phones, desperate to document what they had just experienced. Their fingers trembled as they typed, recounting every detail of the encounter with the strange, humanoid figure that had attacked them. The air felt thick with tension. Each word typed a reminder of the vulnerability they now faced. Iris's mind raced with questions. What was this entity? Why had it targeted them? Could they have done something to prevent it? Nadia's thoughts echoed the same fears, but beneath the surface, a steely resolve began to take shape. They were not going to let this thing dictate their lives any longer. As they shared their findings, a chilling realization settled in. They were not merely victims, they were potential investigators of their own nightmare. Days passed in a blur, marked by unease and uncertainty. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by an insatiable curiosity about the entity that had terrorized them. Iris combed through their mother's belongings, hoping to find anything that might explain the darkness that had seeped into their lives. Nadia stayed close, scanning the journals and letters for clues, but the search often left them feeling more lost than before. They stumbled upon old family photographs, memories captured in time, each smile reminding them of their mother's warmth and laughter. The absence of her presence weighed heavily on them, intensifying the emotions swirling in their hearts. They wondered if their mother had known about the darkness that lingered, if she had sensed the entity before her passing. Conversations about the past turned into discussions about the present and how they could reclaim their lives from the grip of fear. Determined to confront the entity, they planned an outing to a nearby library, hoping to find anything related to the phenomenon they were experiencing. They pored over books, articles, and old newspaper clippings, piecing together information that felt too abstract to apply to their reality. With each word they read, a mix of anxiety and empowerment surged within them, driving them deeper into their investigation. They discussed theories, dismissing those that didn't resonate with their experiences, all while sharing incredulous glances at the sheer oddity of their situation. Time seemed to blend together as they dove further into research, their determination overshadowing the fear that had once held them captive. The library became a sanctuary of sorts, a place where they could control the narrative of their lives and face the unknown with a united front. As they sat in a small corner of the library, a breakthrough moment arrived in the form of an old, dusty book. Its title hinted at supernatural phenomena, catching their attention as they opened it. The pages whispered secrets of entities that fed on emotions, drawing energy from the turmoil they created. Although not directly related to their experience, it ignited a flicker of hope in their hearts, suggesting that knowledge might be their greatest weapon. They shared a knowing glance, both feeling the weight of responsibility pressing upon them. If they could understand this entity, they might find a way to banish it from their lives once and for all. They vowed to return home with renewed purpose, to gather information and strategize their next steps. That evening, the sisters gathered in their living room, surrounded by their findings, armed with notebooks and pens. They meticulously documented each theory and observation, building a foundation for their confrontation with the entity. In that moment, their fear began to morph into something more powerful, a fierce determination to reclaim their home. They drew diagrams, mapped out encounters, and highlighted details that seemed insignificant at first. The walls felt like a fortress of knowledge, transforming the once familiar space into a war room for their battle against the darkness. They were no longer just sisters in fear, they were partners in the pursuit of truth, united by a common goal. The prospect of knowledge empowered them, giving them the strength to face whatever lay ahead. As night fell, the atmosphere shifted, the weight of darkness pressed against their windows, yet they felt a strange sense of control. They would not succumb to fear, they would embrace it, use it to fuel their quest for answers. The earlier encounter had left its mark, but it had also ignited a spark within them. They would seek out every piece of information, even if it meant delving into the unknown. The entity's presence still loomed, but with each passing moment, they felt more equipped to confront it. They discussed how they would react if it reared its head again, rehearsing their plans and refining their strategies. There was no room for hesitation, their resolve had crystallized into an unbreakable bond. As they prepared for bed, a sense of camaraderie enveloped them. The walls that had once felt like a prison now stood as witnesses to their shared journey. Iris took a deep breath, allowing the tension in her shoulders to dissipate slightly as she climbed into bed. Nadia lay beside her, and they exchanged quiet smiles, silently reinforcing their partnership. They had faced the entity once and survived. There was no reason to believe they wouldn't do so again. The whispers of fear still lingered, but they were no longer alone. With that comforting thought, they settled into their beds, a quiet determination weaving through the fabric of the night. The darkness felt less daunting now, a testament to their growing strength and unwavering resolve. As days turned into weeks, Iris and Nadia began to observe subtle shifts in their father's demeanor that left them both concerned and perplexed. At first, they attributed it to the stress of their mother's death and the recent turmoil they had faced with the entity. However, as time went on, the changes grew increasingly noticeable, culminating in a palpable sense of unease within their home. They often found him lost in thought, his eyes gazing into the distance as if searching for something just out of reach. The flicker of uncertainty in his expression seemed to mirror the darkness that had invaded their lives, a troubling connection that neither sister could ignore. They exchanged glances when he was preoccupied, unspoken worries hanging heavy in the air between them. Iris often caught her father staring blankly at the walls, his brow furrowed and his lips moving silently, as if engaged in a conversation only he could hear. The look in his eyes was distant, as if he were trapped in a world that existed beyond their own. In moments when he would snap back to reality, a hint of confusion would cloud his features, as though he couldn't remember how he arrived at that particular moment. This growing detachment concerned Iris, who began to wonder if her father was battling his own unseen entity. Nadia felt it too, a creeping suspicion that the darkness they faced had latched onto him, subtly siphoning away his awareness. Their mother's absence had already left a void. They couldn't bear the thought of losing their father to an unknown force. Conversations that had once flowed easily between them became strained and awkward. He would forget what they had just talked about or repeat stories he had told just moments earlier. On more than one occasion, Iris had witnessed him pacing through the house, mumbling to himself, his hands running through his hair in frustration. It was a stark contrast to the composed man they remembered, and it sent a wave of worry crashing over the sisters. They often conferred quietly, wondering if their father's peculiar behavior was linked to the entity, a thought they couldn't shake. They discussed how he had been withdrawn ever since the attack, retreating further into himself while they struggled to confront their own fears. The siblings felt an unspoken bond in their observations, both determined to find the truth behind their father's unsettling changes. One afternoon, while Iris prepared a meal in the kitchen, she caught sight of her father standing motionless in the hallway, staring at the wall. The sunlight streaming through the window bathed him in warmth, yet he seemed completely unaffected by it. Concern bloomed in her chest, prompting her to set down her knife and approach him. But just as she stepped closer, he blinked rapidly, as if emerging from a trance, and turned to her with a distant smile. "Just thinking," he said, but the words felt hollow and unconvincing. Iris hesitated, sensing the disconnect between his cheerful facade and the underlying darkness that had enveloped their lives. It was a facade that failed to convince her, and she exchanged a worried glance with Nadia, who had entered the room just in time to witness the encounter. Nadia became increasingly vigilant, keenly aware of their father's routines and habits. She noticed the way he would pause in the middle of a task, his expression shifting from focus to bewilderment in mere seconds. Simple actions, like making coffee or checking his phone, would often elicit a prolonged silence, as though he had forgotten what he was doing altogether. There were times when he would fumble through conversations, leaving Iris and Nadia feeling a mix of sympathy and frustration. It was as if he were being drawn into a void, a space where the darkness played tricks on his mind. Nadia felt a protective instinct surge within her, compelling her to uncover what was plaguing him, even if it meant confronting the entity that had begun to weave its presence into the fabric of their lives. Their father also began to display signs of anxiety that were hard to ignore. Late at night, when the house fell silent, they would often find him wandering the living room, his footsteps heavy and restless. The sisters would exchange worried glances as they listened to the sound of his footsteps echoing in the stillness, each step resonating with the weight of their collective fear. Iris noticed that he would often jump at the slightest noise, his heart racing as if he were preparing for a confrontation that never came. Nadia felt her own pulse quicken in response, a visceral connection to the anxiety radiating from their father. It was as though the entity was slowly infiltrating their home, weaving its influence through the cracks of their family unit. The sisters shared an unspoken agreement they had to protect their father, but how could they shield him from an entity that thrived on their fears? Despite their mounting worries, the sisters tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy within their household. They encouraged their father to join them for family dinners, hoping that shared moments could help bridge the growing divide. However, even during these gatherings, there was an invisible barrier that seemed to separate them. He would nod along to conversations, but his eyes held a distant glaze, revealing that he was only partially present. Iris and Nadia would make jokes, trying to coax a genuine smile from him, but his responses felt automatic, as if he were on autopilot. The laughter that once filled their home was overshadowed by an unsettling tension that loomed over their interactions. They felt powerless to break through the facade, each laugh tinged with an undercurrent of anxiety as they tried to connect with the man they once knew. The sisters decided to observe their father more closely, taking note of any patterns that could provide insight into his behavior. They made mental checklists, cataloging the moments when he seemed most affected, trying to pinpoint the times he appeared to struggle the most. It became clear that certain triggers existed, such as when he was alone for extended periods, or when he was confronted with reminders of their mother. The sight of her old photographs seemed to hit him the hardest, drawing him into a spiral of sorrow and confusion. Iris and Nadia would watch as he stood before the frames, his expression shifting from warmth to grief in the blink of an eye. The pain of losing their mother lingered heavily in the air, and the sisters began to suspect that the entity was feeding on this collective grief, using it to further ensnare their father's mind. Late one evening, after a particularly troubling day, Iris overheard her father speaking softly to himself while sitting on the porch. She leaned against the doorframe, listening intently as he murmured incomprehensible words, the rhythm of his voice almost hypnotic. There was an unsettling quality to his tone, an urgency that made her stomach churn. Her heart raced as she wondered if he was aware of the entity's influence, or if he was simply lost in his own thoughts. The night air felt thick with tension, and the shadows around him seemed to deepen, even though they had agreed to avoid references to darkness in their quest for answers. Something deep within her stirred. She knew they had to confront their father about what they suspected, but fear held her back. As the sisters regrouped later that night, they shared their observations, each recounting the most unsettling moments they had witnessed. The conversation flowed easily, fueled by the bond they had cultivated through their shared fears and experiences. They were determined to confront their father, to unravel the truth behind his strange behavior and its potential connection to the entity. Their plans were interrupted by a sudden crash outside, echoing through the stillness of the night. The sisters exchanged alarmed glances, their instincts urging them to investigate. Together they moved cautiously toward the door, hearts pounding in anticipation of what they might find. Whatever awaited them outside, they would face it together, ready to protect their family and confront the entity that had begun to unravel their lives. With their father's increasingly erratic behavior weighing heavily on their minds, Iris and Nadia felt compelled to dig deeper into their mother's past, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain their father's distress. The attic, a dusty and often overlooked space in their home, became the focal point of their investigation. They gathered flashlights and boxes, a mix of anticipation and anxiety coursing through them as they ascended the creaky stairs. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories, each box holding remnants of their mother's life. As they pushed aside old blankets and cobwebs, they shared silent glances, both knowing the significance of what they might uncover. Iris's heart raced as she rifled through a box filled with photographs and mementos from their mother's life before motherhood. The images captured moments of laughter, friendships, and adventures that felt distant now, swallowed by the grief of loss. Amidst the remnants of joy, she noticed a stack of worn notebooks, their spines cracked from years of use. With a sense of reverence, she pulled one from the pile and began to flip through its pages. The handwriting, flowing and elegant, felt like a direct connection to her mother, an invitation to delve into the thoughts that had once filled her mind. Each page turn brought new revelations, but one theme echoed throughout, a persistent unease that had gripped their mother long before her passing. As Iris continued to read, her brows furrowed with concern. The entries detailed a growing anxiety, mentioning a dark presence that had begun to invade their home, seemingly attached to their father. Words like shadow and weight recurred throughout the notes, capturing a sense of dread that resonated with the experiences Iris and Nadia had encountered. Their mother had written about moments when their father would stare blankly, lost in thought, and how she feared for his mental state. The parallels between her mother's observations and their current situation became increasingly unsettling, as if the journals were a prophetic account of the very events they were living. The realization that their mother had sensed something before her death ignited a fire within Iris they needed to uncover the truth. Nadia, equally absorbed in the discovery, began to sift through a nearby box filled with their mother's personal effects. She pulled out an envelope containing loose notes, each one a fragmented thought or observation about their family life. A few caught her attention, each one discussing her mother's intuition about something dark lurking beneath the surface of their father's affable demeanor. Nadia's heart sank as she read through her mother's fears, the words revealing a sense of helplessness in the face of an unseen adversary. It was clear their mother had been fighting a battle of her own, one that had ultimately cost her life. They exchanged glances filled with determination. They had to understand the depth of what their mother had faced. The further they dug into their mother's belongings, the more notes Iris uncovered about her attempts to confront the darkness she felt. There were passages detailing late-night conversations with their father, where she tried to coax him into sharing his fears, only to be met with vague reassurances that everything was fine. Her mother's frustration was palpable, evidenced by hastily scrawled annotations in the margins of the pages. It was as though she had been attempting to convince herself that the entity could be vanquished, but the burden of doubt and fear slowly seeped through her writing. The sisters felt a mix of admiration for their mother's bravery and sorrow for the weight she had carried alone. As they continued to sift through their mother's memories, they stumbled upon a photo album that seemed out of place. The cover was worn, its edges frayed, hinting at years of handling. When Iris opened it, she found pictures from their father's past, moments that predated their marriage and the family they had built. The images showed their father with friends, a younger version of him full of life and laughter. But as they flipped through the pages, a growing sense of dread enveloped them. Each image bore a date that coincided with the onset of their mother's unease, an unsettling timeline of events that seemed to align perfectly. One photograph in particular caught Iris's eye, her father standing in front of an old, crumbling building, the shadows of the trees casting ominous shapes across the facade. There was an unsettling energy to the picture, and it triggered a memory of a fleeting mention their mother had made about a place she had wanted to investigate. The sense that something had tethered itself to their father grew stronger, intertwining their past with the dark presence that now haunted their lives. Nadia's brow furrowed as she studied the image, her gut instinct telling her that this building held significance, perhaps even a key to understanding what had transpired before their mother's passing. Feeling a rush of urgency, the sisters decided to pool their findings and create a cohesive timeline of their mother's insights and experiences. They gathered around the attic's dim light, a circle of papers strewn between them, as they began piecing together the puzzle that had eluded them for so long. The notes, photographs, and entries painted a picture of a woman who had fought valiantly against an insidious force while striving to protect her family. Iris felt a spark of determination ignite within her as she thought of her mother's courage. They needed to honor her memory by unearthing the truth and putting an end to whatever had invaded their lives. Hours passed as they connected dots and made discoveries, each revelation only heightening their sense of purpose. They realized that their father's strange behavior was not a recent development, but rather a gradual decline fueled by a force they still couldn't fully comprehend. As they wrote out their timeline, a chilling thought crossed Iris's mind. What if the entity had not only been present during their mother's life, but had also influenced the circumstances surrounding her death? The sisters felt a heavy weight of responsibility. They had to protect their father from the darkness that had slipped through the cracks of their family. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Iris and Nadia made a pact. They would confront their father about what they had discovered, to seek answers from him, and to understand the connection he had with the entity their mother had feared. The knowledge they had gained felt like a weapon against the darkness, an insight that could guide them through the treacherous path ahead. As they descended from the attic, each step felt like a march toward an uncertain confrontation, one that would potentially unravel the very fabric of their family. They shared a look of steely resolve, ready to face whatever truths lay ahead, united in their quest for answers. With the weight of their discoveries heavy on their shoulders, Iris and Nadia gathered their courage as they prepared to confront their father. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the living room where they waited. They exchanged glances, each knowing the importance of this moment, the fear swirling in the pit of their stomachs palpable. Their father had always been their protector, the one who had guided them through life's uncertainties, yet now he seemed more like a stranger. The thought of confronting him about the entity and their mother's hidden truths sent shivers down their spines. They understood that this conversation could unravel the delicate fabric of their family, but the need for clarity outweighed their hesitation. When their father finally entered the room, his demeanor was subdued, a far cry from the robust presence they had known. He sat down on the couch, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off an unseen weight. Iris took a deep breath, her heart racing as she chose her words carefully, aware that she was treading on fragile ground. The sisters had witnessed his forgetfulness, the moments where he appeared lost in thought, and they knew it was time to voice their concerns. They began to recount their experiences, the strange sightings, the chilling encounters with the entity, and the escalating fear that had woven itself into their daily lives. As they spoke, they watched for his reaction, gauging whether he would dismiss their claims or acknowledge the darkness that had infiltrated their home. Nadia felt a knot in her throat as she detailed the memories they had uncovered, how their mother had sensed something amiss long before her passing. She could see the flicker of recognition in their father's eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the truth that had been lingering unspoken for too long. The room felt charged with tension, each moment stretching into eternity as they waited for his response. As they shared the information from their mother's journals, the atmosphere shifted, and a heaviness settled over them. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the sounds of their breaths and the distant creaking of the house. Their father's expression changed, a mix of confusion and sorrow crossing his face. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but then hesitated, as if searching for the right words to articulate the storm within him. The sisters held their breaths, the urgency of their mission urging them to press on. They didn't want to rush him, but they also felt the weight of time slipping away, the entity's presence looming like a specter in their lives. As they continued to speak, it became apparent that he was wrestling with emotions buried deep within. Each shared experience seemed to unlock a memory, a moment of clarity that brought both pain and understanding. As they delved deeper into the discussion, Iris noticed subtle changes in her father's demeanor. He seemed to be grappling with the reality of their words, his brow furrowing as he wrestled with something that lay just beyond his grasp. The sisters exchanged worried glances, silently communicating their concern for the man they loved, unsure if he was ready to confront the truth of his past. With each revelation, it became increasingly clear that he had been battling an unseen force that had crept into their lives, like an insidious shadow that had grown more potent with time. The entity was not just a recent horror, but a manifestation of something far more complex. Nadia found herself compelled to probe deeper, her desire to uncover the truth outweighing her trepidation. She gently urged their father to share his own experiences, to reveal what he had felt and seen over the years. As he began to speak, his voice wavered, caught between the weight of memory and the gravity of the present. The sisters listened intently, their hearts aching for the man who had been their cornerstone. They could see the pain etched on his face, the struggle to articulate feelings that had long been buried beneath layers of denial. In that moment, they realized that their father, too, had been a victim, ensnared by the very darkness they were now trying to confront. With each confession, the sisters felt the distance between them and their father begin to close, the invisible barrier of fear gradually breaking down. He spoke of the moments when he would sense something lurking just out of sight, an entity that seemed to thrive on his unease. His words were fragmented, but they painted a picture of a man grappling with a reality he hadn't fully comprehended. It was clear that the connection between their mother and the entity was more profound than they had imagined, a link that had bound their family in ways they were only beginning to understand. The atmosphere in the room shifted from one of confrontation to a shared vulnerability, the trio standing at the precipice of a collective truth. The conversation deepened as they shared memories of their mother, who had fought valiantly against the encroaching darkness. Tears welled in Nadia's eyes as she recalled how their mother had tried to protect them, often taking the brunt of the entity's presence herself. Their father's gaze softened at the mention of her name, the grief bubbling to the surface as he spoke of the love and strength she had embodied. It was a bittersweet moment, each memory a reminder of the fierce bond that had once held them together. They realized they were not just confronting an entity, but a shared past that was intertwined with love, fear, and an undeniable sense of loss. As the conversation drew to a close, Iris felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had opened the door to understanding, but now they needed to delve deeper into the entity's origins and the connection it had with their family. They had begun to dismantle the walls that had divided them, forging a path toward healing and knowledge. Their father, while still grappling with the truth, appeared more resolute, the shadows of uncertainty giving way to a flicker of determination. The sisters exchanged a look of solidarity, knowing they were no longer alone in their battle against the darkness. Before they parted for the night, they made a pact to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. As they prepared to leave the living room, a sense of hope ignited within them, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, they could find strength in unity. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with their father finally aware of the truth, they had taken a crucial step toward reclaiming their lives. As they headed to their respective rooms, the shadows in the corners of the house felt less daunting, as if the entity's hold was weakening just a fraction. United, they were ready to face the uncertainties of the coming days, armed with the knowledge that they were a family bound not just by blood, but by the resolve to confront their fears. After their previous conversation, a flicker of hope had ignited between them, but uncertainty loomed, a constant reminder of the threat still present. It was late evening, the darkness outside casting an oppressive weight on their hearts. The sisters had agreed to search for answers, but an undercurrent of dread accompanied their every move. Something was shifting in the shadows, and they could feel the entity's presence growing more tangible, more intent on its purpose. It was time to confront the truth lurking just beyond their grasp. Iris sat with her back against the couch, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was not merely a malevolent force, but something more, something that had ties to their father's past. She glanced at Nadia, who was peering out the window, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. The two sisters shared an unspoken understanding they needed to confront the entity head-on, to coax out the truth it so desperately wanted to keep hidden. As they steeled themselves for what lay ahead, a sudden chill swept through the room, raising the hair on their arms. It was a coldness that settled in the very marrow of their bones, signaling the entity's arrival. As if summoned by their resolve, the room darkened slightly, the air crackling with an energy that was both unnerving and electric. The entity materialized before them, its form shifting in and out of focus, an unsettling presence that felt eerily familiar. Iris and Nadia felt a wave of nausea wash over them as they tried to comprehend the figure before them. In that moment, they were struck by an overwhelming sense of connection, a feeling that this entity was intricately woven into the fabric of their lives, a thread they could not unravel. A voice, smooth yet dissonant, filled the room, wrapping around them like a whispering breeze. It held a strange allure, a seductive promise that sent shivers down their spines. "I've been waiting for you," it said, the words echoing like a haunting melody. "Your father has always kept you close, but now it's time for him to understand the depths of his grief." The entity's tone shifted, a trace of longing and bitterness threading through its words. It spoke of love lost, of a bond that transcended the physical realm, hinting at a tragic past that had been buried beneath layers of denial. Iris and Nadia exchanged glances, their hearts pounding in their chests as they processed the implications of its message. The entity wasn't just a threat, it was a manifestation of something that had once been cherished, a love that had morphed into a dark obsession. With each word, the entity spun a tale of loss that resonated deep within their souls. It spoke of their father's first love, a woman whose name was whispered like a ghost in their family's history. She had perished in a tragic accident, leaving their father shattered and alone, adrift in a sea of despair. He should have been with her, but fate intervened. The entity continued, its voice laced with a bitter sweetness. "Your father survived while she did not, and in his grief he made a desperate wish." The room seemed to pulse with the weight of this revelation, the sisters hanging on to every word as the entity laid bare the depths of their father's sorrow. The entity's narrative painted their father as a man driven by love, consumed by the desire to bring back what he had lost. Iris felt a pang of sympathy, grappling with the complexity of emotions swirling within her. But as the entity elaborated, the truth grew darker. He sought out a power beyond his understanding, a malevolent being that offered him a chance to rewrite destiny, it revealed, the tone shifting to one of satisfaction. In his desperation, he made a deal, one that twisted his very soul. The sisters exchanged horrified glances, the gravity of their father's actions crashing over them like a tidal wave. He'd been so blinded by grief that he had sacrificed his own well-being, placing them all in jeopardy. With a flourish, the entity spoke of how it had emerged from the remnants of their father's wish, a being that had taken on the essence of the woman he had lost. It thrived on the bond they once shared, but now its presence had morphed into something sinister. "I am her, and yet I am not," it taunted, its voice dripping with mockery. "Your father's wish brought me forth, and now I exist to keep him company in the darkness." The sisters felt a chill creep through them as the entity laid bare its intentions, revealing that it sought to isolate their father from them, feeding off the loneliness that would follow. A wave of realization crashed over Iris and Nadia as they began to piece together the puzzle. Their father's strange behavior, his increasing withdrawal, all pointed to a desperate attempt to shield them from the entity's wrath. He hadn't just lost his love, he had unintentionally invited a monster into their home, one that thrived on isolation and despair. The entity reveled in the notion that it had manipulated their father's grief, drawing him deeper into its grasp. He thought he could control it, but he underestimated the darkness that lives within, it hissed, the words filled with an unsettling glee. "And now, he isolates himself to protect you, but in doing so, he leaves you vulnerable to me." The sisters stood frozen, grappling with the entity's revelations. They had believed their father was simply grieving, struggling with loss, but now it was clear he had known more than he let on. The truth struck them like a blow. He had thought he was acting in their best interest, but in reality he had been complicit in the very danger they faced. The entity seemed to relish their shock, its form shimmering with a malevolent energy as it continued to weave its dark narrative. The bond of love can be twisted, turned into something unrecognizable, it taunted, its eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. and your father is trapped in the web of his own making." The sisters felt a surge of anger rise within them, mingling with the fear that had gripped them for so long. This entity was not just a monster, it was a tragic reflection of their father's past mistakes. As it spoke, they felt an unyielding resolve begin to form. They would not allow their father's grief to doom them. The entity may have thought it had them cornered, but they were determined to fight back. "Your time is short," the entity warned, its voice dropping to a low hiss. "Soon, he will be mine completely, and you will be nothing but memories." The threat hung in the air like a shroud, chilling and profound. As the entity faded back into the shadows, a sense of clarity washed over Iris and Nadia. They now understood the connection that bound them to this dark force, and it fueled their determination to confront their father. They could not allow his past to dictate their future, nor could they let this entity consume him completely. They would unearth the truth, face their fears, and find a way to sever the ties that bound their family to this malevolent force. With a shared glance of unspoken agreement, they steeled themselves for the fight ahead, ready to reclaim their lives from the darkness that had woven itself into their very existence. With the weight of their newfound knowledge pressing heavily upon them, Iris and Nadia prepared for what would be the defining moment of their lives. The entity had woven itself into their father's very being, feeding on the grief that had consumed him since his first love's tragic death. Now the sisters understood that they must confront him, not just to save themselves, but to save their father from the grip of this insidious force. Their hearts raced with a mix of fear and determination as they meticulously planned the confrontation, knowing they would need more than words to break the hold the entity had on him. In the dim light of their living room, Iris and Nadia gathered supplies, setting up an elaborate trap that would hopefully protect them from the entity's advances. They strategically positioned powerful focus lights around the house, creating a barrier of light that would serve as a defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Each beam was calibrated to expose the entity, an act of defiance against the grip it held on their family. As they set the final light in place, an electric buzz filled the air, mirroring the tension that crackled between them. They shared a determined glance, aware of the risks that lay ahead but resolved to fight for their father and their family's future. When the night fell, the sisters waited in the shadows of their home, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. They had made sure to keep their father out of the house, hoping to catch the entity off guard when it attempted to strike. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, a symphony of nature that mirrored their anxiety. Moments turned into hours as they sat in silence, the dim lights casting flickering shadows against the walls, creating a sense of unease that clung to them like a second skin. Just when they thought they might have to abandon their plan, a chill swept through the room, a harbinger of the darkness that had been patiently lurking. The lights in the house flickered, then dimmed, and in that instant they knew the entity had come to claim its prey. Iris felt her heart pound in her chest, a rhythm of fear that echoed in her ears. Nadia's fingers gripped the edges of the table, her knuckles whitening as they braced themselves for what was to come. The air turned cold, wrapping around them like an icy shroud, and the unmistakable presence of the entity surged forward, intent on reclaiming its hold over their father. In that moment, they could hear the faint thrum of electricity as their carefully laid trap sprang into action. As the entity appeared before them, its form shifting and coiling in the darkness, the sisters activated the focus lights. The beams sliced through the murky air, illuminating the entity's grotesque features. It writhed and recoiled, shrieking in anger as the light burned into its form. The sisters felt a surge of adrenaline, realizing that their preparation was working. But just as they began to feel a sense of hope, the lights flickered violently, a testament to the entity's power. In an instant, darkness enveloped the house, plunging them into chaos as the power was abruptly cut, plunging not just their home but the entire neighborhood into a void. Panic set in as the sisters stumbled through the darkness, the air thick with tension. They knew they had to stay focused, but the weight of the entity's presence loomed heavily around them. In the suffocating darkness, the entity lunged at Iris and Nadia with a ferocity that stole the breath from their lungs. The air crackled with tension as they struggled to find their footing, their hearts pounding in their chests like war drums. It was impossible to see, but they could feel its cold breath on their skin, a palpable reminder of the malevolent force that threatened to engulf them. Iris swung her arm wildly, trying to push back against the unseen horror, but her hand met nothing but empty air. A sharp pain flared in her side as the entity's claws dug into her flesh, tearing through the fabric of her shirt, leaving a stinging trail of bruises that blossomed like dark flowers on her skin. Nadia stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the hardwood floor as she collided with a piece of furniture, pain radiating through her body. The darkness twisted around them, mocking their every attempt to defend themselves. The entity hissed, a guttural sound that echoed off the walls, sending shivers down their spines. Nadia managed to regain her footing just as the entity lunged for her again, its form a blur in the oppressive blackness. She ducked just in time, feeling the rush of air as it missed her by mere inches. But the malevolence of the force was undeniable, striking terror into her heart. They could hear it moving, a grotesque sound like bones cracking and sinew stretching, as it stalked them through the shadows. Each moment was a terrifying game of cat and mouse, their adrenaline-fueled instincts driving them to fight back against the impending doom. Iris grabbed a nearby lamp, swinging it in the dark, hoping to connect with the entity. The lamp shattered upon impact with the wall, its light extinguished, leaving them shrouded in even deeper darkness. The entity retaliated with a vengeance, slamming into her with enough force to knock her off her feet, the wind driven from her lungs as she landed hard against the floor. The sisters were now fully aware that their surroundings had become a chaotic battleground, the air thick with the scent of fear and desperation. Nadia felt a jolt of pain as the entity's hand gripped her ankle, yanking her down to the ground, dragging her toward the pitch-black void that seemed to pulse with insatiable hunger. In a desperate attempt to break free, she kicked and flailed, her nails scraping against the hardwood as she fought against the unyielding grip. The entity howled in fury, the sound reverberating off the walls, causing the very structure of the house to tremble, as if the home itself were a victim of its wrath. Just as Nadia felt the cold grip of despair beginning to envelop her, Iris managed to crawl toward her sister, summoning every ounce of strength left within her. She reached out, grabbing Nadia's arm and pulling with all her might, desperate to keep her sister from being consumed by the entity's dark embrace. But as they clung to each other, the entity lashed out again, striking Iris with a violent blow that sent her sprawling across the room. The force of the attack shattered her resolve, leaving her gasping for breath, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. The sisters realized they were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, the entity's wrath echoing through their home as they fought to survive against the very embodiment of their deepest fears. It was then that they heard their father's voice, strained and full of despair. He had returned, oblivious to the chaos that had ensued. "Iris, Nadia," he called out, searching for them amidst the oppressive silence. The entity hissed, its rage palpable, and in that moment, everything came to a head. The sisters realized that the entity was drawing strength from their father's anguish, an all-consuming darkness that threatened to tear their family apart. In a final surge of desperation, their father understood the truth. He had become the very vessel that allowed this entity to thrive. The realization struck him like lightning, igniting a fire within his heart. He knew that to save his daughters, he had to sacrifice the bond he had inadvertently created with this malevolent force. The sisters watched in horror as their father stepped forward. A mix of courage and resignation etched across his face. "I can't let it hurt you," he murmured, determination shining in his eyes, though fear flickered behind them. With a final, heart-wrenching look at Iris and Nadia, he stepped into the heart of the darkness, confronting the entity that had ensnared him for so long. "You wanted me to be alone," he shouted, voice reverberating through the blackness. "But I won't let you take my daughters." The entity screeched, a sound that twisted through the air, but he stood firm. With a piercing glare, he reached for the flickering beam of light they had set up, the last hope against the insatiable darkness. In that moment, the entity lunged at him, but instead of cowering, he embraced it, stepping into its maw with a purpose that was both tragic and brave. The sisters screamed, a mix of horror and disbelief flooding through them as they felt the entity lash out, its presence attempting to consume their father. But just as the darkness threatened to engulf him, he unleashed a blinding light from the device, illuminating the space in a cascade of brilliance. The entity recoiled, its form flickering as it struggled against the intensity. The sisters watched, paralyzed by grief and fear, as their father stood resolute, the energy coursing through him illuminating the room, casting away the shadows that had clung to their lives for so long. In that climactic moment, the entity shrieked in fury, its hold on their father faltering as it was forced back into the depths from which it had emerged. But the sacrifice was immense. With every ounce of his being, their father channeled the light, breaking the connection that had threatened to destroy them all. As the blinding radiance enveloped him, Iris and Nadia felt a heartbreaking loss wash over them. Their father's form began to dissolve in the brilliance, and they knew in their hearts that this was the end of his struggle. In an instant, the light exploded, casting away the darkness that had ruled their lives. The entity was banished, its anguished cries fading into nothingness, leaving behind a silence so profound it echoed through their souls. Iris and Nadia collapsed to the floor, the weight of their loss crashing down upon them like a tidal wave. Their father was gone, sacrificed for their safety, leaving them to grapple with the enormity of what had transpired. As tears streamed down their faces, they could feel the absence of the love that had once filled their home. The neighborhood remained shrouded in darkness, but for the sisters, a flicker of hope began to emerge. They had faced unimaginable terror and witnessed the depths of their father's love, a love that had ultimately saved them from the clutches of despair. Though the path ahead was uncertain and filled with grief, they understood that they would carry their father's memory with them, a guiding light in the shadow of their loss. With heavy hearts, they rose from the floor, ready to confront a future forever altered but resolute in their strength as sisters. The bond between them had been fortified in the face of tragedy, and they would honor their father's sacrifice by moving forward, together. Whispers from the stacks. In the heart of a forgotten town in Sweden, nestled between the gnarled roots of ancient trees, stood an old library, built in the late 1800s. Its towering structure, once a beacon of knowledge and community, had long since fallen into disrepair. Locals whispered that the library had been constructed over the remnants of an old graveyard, where restless spirits lingered, their sorrow entwined with the very foundation of the building. The town, once bustling with life, had succumbed to decay. It was said that every resident who had ever dared to enter the library felt its sinister pull. Shadows flitted through the streets at dusk, and an unsettling hush blanketed the town after dark. The townsfolk knew better than to wander near the library, their fear fueled by stories passed down through generations, tales of patrons who entered the library only to vanish, consumed by the very stories they sought to read, echoed through the dimly lit taverns. Clara was not from this town. She had moved here recently, seeking a wellspring of inspiration for her writing career. An aspiring novelist, she had grown weary of the relentless distractions of city life, where the noise and chaos drowned out her creativity. She envisioned a serene environment, one where the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds could replace the blaring horns and bustling crowds. The town's quiet charm, with its cobblestone streets and aging buildings, seemed like a perfect backdrop for her tales of suspense and horror. As she settled into her new surroundings, Clara began to hear whispers about the library, an establishment steeped in legend and lore. It was during her morning coffee at a quaint cafe that she first overheard the murmurs, shared between two elderly women huddled in the corner. They spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting around as if the very walls had ears. "They say it's haunted," one said, her voice trembling. "Many who enter never return. It draws you in with promises of knowledge, but it's a trap." Clara's curiosity deepened when she spoke to the cafe owner, an older man with a weathered face. "Stay away from that place," Lassie warned, wiping down the counter with a trembling cloth. "It's not what it seems. People have gone mad trying to uncover its secrets." Yet the more she heard, the more intrigued she became. Stories of its crumbling facade, veiled in creeping vines and shrouded in mystery, tugged at her imagination. Clara felt an irresistible pull toward the library, as if it were calling out to her, promising untold secrets and inspiration lurking within its shadowy corners. With dreams of crafting a gripping horror story that could finally launch her career, Clara arrived at the library armed with her notebook and a flickering lantern. As she approached the library's imposing entrance, she noticed that the heavy wooden doors were partially ajar, creaking ominously as the wind whispered through the cracks. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and she hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. Just as she was about to step inside, an elderly man emerged from the shadows, his face drawn and weary. "Don't go in there," he said, his voice barely more than a rasp. "It's closed. For a reason. People have disappeared." His eyes, wide and haunted, bore into hers, making her stomach twist with unease. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded and took a step back, heart racing, before the inexplicable compulsion to enter overwhelmed her. As she turned to enter the door, the man staggered back into the shadows, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to emerge. She caught a fleeting glimpse of fear etched across his face, and then he disappeared into the night, swallowed by the darkness. Taking a deep breath, Clara pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, she was enveloped by an oppressive silence that seemed to wrap around her like a heavy cloak. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and decay, a suffocating reminder of the library's long-forgotten past. Dust motes hung like specters in the air, swirling gently in the dim light, creating an ethereal atmosphere that felt both inviting and foreboding. Each breath felt like an intrusion, as if the library resented her presence, clinging to its secrets and sorrows. The musty scent of aged paper filled her lungs, rich and suffocating, reminiscent of lives lost to time. The air was heavy with the weight of untold stories, each one waiting to be unleashed, each whispering from the shadows, eager to escape their confinement. Clara could almost hear the echoes of desperate voices, trapped in the pages of the books, their cries fading into the silence around her. The stillness was punctuated only by the faint creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet, as if the very building was alive, groaning under the burden of its history. The shelves loomed high above her, dark and foreboding, their surfaces coated in a thick layer of dust, as if time had stopped within these walls. Clara's heart raced as she stepped further inside, the chill of the air wrapping around her like a shroud. Shadows danced just out of sight, fleeting and elusive, urging her to delve deeper into the maze of forgotten tomes. As she ventured further, the darkness pressed in around her, thickening with each step. The library felt like a living entity, breathing slowly, the oppressive atmosphere filled with the weight of countless souls lost to its depths. Clara's skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, as if unseen eyes scrutinized her every move. The very walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat, echoing her rising fear, each beat resonating with a promise of doom. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a warning, and the shadows elongated, stretching menacingly toward her, as if they yearned to ensnare her. The air grew colder, seeping into her bones, and an unsettling whisper curled around her, brushing against her ears like a chilling caress. The oppressive silence was no longer comforting. It was a tangible entity, suffocating and sinister, urging her to turn back, yet she felt an insatiable pull, an urge to uncover the library's dark secrets, even as dread settled deep in her gut. As she wandered through the labyrinth of shelves, she felt an unsettling sense of being watched, the weight of unseen eyes following her every move. Then, from the corner of her eye, she caught sight of the librarian. A woman with wild, silver-streaked hair and a face etched with lines of worry and wisdom peered at her from a shadowed alcove. She wore a long, tattered dress that brushed the floor, blending seamlessly with the gloom of the library. Her eyes, sharp and penetrating, glinted like shards of glass in the dim light. Clara was struck by the unsettling intensity of her gaze, as if the librarian could see into her very soul. "Ah, a curious soul," the librarian said, her voice a low, almost melodic whisper that reverberated through the stillness. Not many dare to tread these paths. She gestured to the shelves around them, her fingers trembling slightly as she brushed against the spines of the ancient books. "This place holds secrets, dear girl, but not all of them are meant for the light of day." Clara swallowed hard, intrigued yet wary. "What do you mean? Are the stories really that dangerous?" she asked, stepping closer, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. The librarian leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "You must understand, every tale within these walls is woven from the fabric of fear and longing. They can ensnare those who seek to unearth their truths. Beware the shadows, for they thrive on the curiosity of the unwary." Her expression softened for a moment, and Clara could almost see the flicker of something akin to sorrow in her gaze. "I once had dreams like yours, but I learned the hard way that some stories are best left untold." Clara dismissed the warning, eager to find inspiration. She continued her exploration, her fingers trailing along the spines of books, each one whispering a promise of adventure and intrigue. As she turned a corner, she found herself in a dimly lit section of the library, the air heavy with dust and the scent of mold. It was there, tucked between a pair of ancient tomes, that she stumbled upon a peculiar book. With trembling hands, Clara carefully pulled the book from its dusty resting place. It felt strangely warm, as though it had been waiting for her. She opened it, and a cold wave of dread washed over her as the pages unfurled. The words within came alive, swirling and shifting, drawing her deeper into their dark embrace. The letters twisted and writhed on the page, forming shapes that whispered secrets of despair. A faint sound, like a distant lament, curled around her, as if the very fabric of the book was alive, breathing in sync with her mounting trepidation. Shadows in the corners of her vision flickered, as if the library itself was watching, eager to see what she would do next. Clara felt the air grow heavier, as if the weight of the library's history pressed against her chest, warning her that she was treading dangerous ground. As the text wove itself into her mind, Clara felt an intoxicating mixture of fear and fascination, her curiosity igniting into an uncontrollable flame. The book was more than just a collection of stories. It was a portal into a world where her deepest fears could be realized, a figurative gateway that opened not just to other tales, but to the very essence of her nightmares. Each story was a dark reflection of her psyche, a realm where the line between reality and fiction blurred, threatening to consume her. She was utterly captivated, ensnared by the seductive power of the words that promised to unveil the darkest corners of her mind. As the days turned into nights, Clara returned to the library again and again. She sought stories of fear and darkness, believing they could ignite her creativity. But the book's tales became increasingly sinister, each one reflecting her deepest fears and insecurities. With every page, Clara recognized shadows of her own life, a friend who had betrayed her, a moment of paralyzing self-doubt, a deep-seated fear of failure. The characters in the stories mirrored her struggles, their fates intertwined with her own. One tale unfolded about a writer who lost everything to her obsession, a chilling echo of Clara's own desperate drive for success. Another recounted the anguish of a woman consumed by her insecurities, a mirror held up to her own relentless self-criticism. The whispers grew louder, gnawing at her thoughts, as if the library itself was feeding on her fear. Each story clawed at her psyche, leaving her more fragile, more paranoid. The shadows seemed to gather closer, closing in as her grip on reality began to slip. It was as if the library, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a prison that fed on her darkest fears. The walls felt like they were closing in around her, suffocating her with an unseen weight, and she could almost hear her heart racing in the echoing silence. Clara fought against the rising tide of dread, but it wrapped around her mind like a serpent, squeezing tighter with every sinister word she read. Yet, despite the oppressive atmosphere, she found herself returning to the library, driven by an insatiable thirst for inspiration. The stories, dark and haunting, beckoned her, whispering promises of untold creativity hidden within their pages. It was a paradox. The more they consumed her, the more she felt alive in her writing. Clara was aware of the toll it was taking on her psyche, but the fear seemed to spark a new kind of energy within her, igniting her imagination. Each chilling tale held a mirror to her own life, exposing her fears of failure, abandonment, and the crushing weight of expectation. The unsettling allure of the library became a labyrinth of her own making, drawing her in deeper even as shadows crept ever closer. She felt compelled to understand the darkness she was inviting, believing that by confronting it, she might transform her fears into something beautiful. Her childhood friend Mark, who had always believed in her talent, came to visit after hearing about her move. They had grown up together, sharing dreams and ambitions under the sprawling branches of their hometown park. Mark had been her confidant, the one who listened patiently as she spun stories of adventure and horror. His unwavering support had fueled her passion, and he often encouraged her to pursue her writing without fear. Though he was initially skeptical about Clara's stories of the library, his curiosity about the town's eerie reputation prompted him to join her for an evening visit to the library. He viewed it as a chance to support his friend, albeit with a hint of concern at her fascination with the supernatural. As they stepped into the library together, Mark was struck by the heavy silence that enveloped them. The air felt thick, almost charged, as if the very walls were holding their breath. He observed Clara, who moved with a mix of eagerness and apprehension, her eyes darting from shelf to shelf. The dim light cast long shadows that danced across the floor, and for a moment he felt an unsettling chill crawl up his spine, dismissing it as a mere draft. While Clara began to explore, Mark lingered near the entrance, taking in the scene. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, and he could almost sense the weight of history pressing down on him. The smell of aged paper and mildew wrapped around him like an unwelcome embrace, igniting a flicker of unease in the back of his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but he tried to brush it aside, focusing instead on Clara's excitement. As he ventured deeper into the library, the atmosphere shifted. The shelves loomed taller, their dark wood creating an oppressive canopy that felt like it might close in on him. He noticed Clara mumbling softly to herself as she read, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was then he heard a faint whisper, like the rustle of dry leaves, brushing past his ear. He spun around, expecting to see someone behind him, but the aisles remained empty, shadows pooling like ink at their feet. Unease began to settle in his gut as he continued to follow Clara, who seemed oblivious to the changing ambience around them. He watched as she reached for a book, her fingers trembling slightly. The sight made his heart race, and he felt a twinge of concern. Was she really so entranced by the stories, or was there something deeper at play here? He resolved to keep an eye on her, sensing that the library was more than just a repository of books. It felt like a living entity, aware of their presence. As they delved deeper into the stacks, eerie whispers danced through the air, brushing against his ears like a forgotten song. He thought it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but the whispers grew louder, almost insistent. Shadows flickered at the corners of his vision, and he felt a chill wash over him. The flickering lights overhead seemed to pulse in sync with his rising anxiety, creating an unsettling rhythm that echoed in his mind. By the time Clara finished reading a particularly unsettling tale, Mark could no longer ignore the tension in the air. The library's malevolence pressed against him, weaving itself into his thoughts, and he felt a chill of understanding wash over him. It was not merely Clara's imagination. Something dark and ancient lurked within these walls, and he could no longer deny its presence. Mark decided to extend his stay, sensing Clara's deepening obsession with the library and its unsettling stories. He had known her since childhood, and their friendship was rooted in shared experiences and trust. Clara's adventurous spirit had always drawn him in, but now he felt a protective instinct surge within him. The library's eerie whispers and shifting shadows worried him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she might be in over her head. Each visit seemed to pull Clara deeper into a world of darkness, and Mark wanted to be there to keep her grounded. He figured that by staying close he could remind her of the life waiting outside the library's haunting walls, and the stories they had once shared, tales filled with hope, not fear. As they returned day after day, he felt an urgency to shield her from the library's insidious allure, hoping that together they could unravel its mysteries without losing themselves in the process. The old library was not just a repository of books, it was a vessel of souls, a haunting entity that craved stories as sustenance. Over the years, countless patrons had entered its shadowy confines, drawn by the promise of knowledge and inspiration. But the library was a cunning predator, feeding on the life experiences of those who wandered through its doors. Each book on its shelves contained the essence of a trapped soul, tales of ambition, heartbreak, triumph, and despair, all woven into the fabric of the library itself. It absorbed the stories of those who entered, imprisoning their spirits within its pages, ensuring that their narratives would never be told outside its walls. The library thrived on the cycle of creation and consumption, perpetuating its existence through the very fears and dreams of its captives. During one of their visits, Mark stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound book that bore an uncanny resemblance to his own life. The cover was adorned with his name, and the first few pages detailed a story of friendship, ambition, and a haunting pursuit of creativity. Initially dismissing it as a strange coincidence, he felt a chill creep up his spine but decided to put the book back on the shelf, unaware of the danger it posed. One fateful night, After reading a particularly chilling story, Clara discovered that she could not find her way out. The exits had shifted, warping into a maze of shelves that seemed to mock her panic. Just then, Mark was pulled deeper into the library's clutches. The walls shifted and moved, trapping him away from her. "Clara," he shouted, the sound of his voice echoing in the vast emptiness as the bookshelves morphed, closing in around them. Desperation clawed at Clara's throat as she clutched the cursed book, the pages whispering dark promises. The library itself seemed to come alive, the shelves shifting and twisting, pulling her in different directions as she fought to stay grounded. In a chaotic whirl, she lost sight of Mark, his silhouette swallowed by the moving shadows. In a frantic attempt to escape, Clara felt the weight of the library's dark presence pressing in on her. She knew it was feeding off her fear and despair, and she was determined to resist. She confronted the lurking terror, but it only laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the vast emptiness. As the library consumed the last remnants of her will, she sensed Mark's presence fading away, his voice a distant cry swallowed by the dark. Her heart raced as she realized the only way to survive was to get rid of the book. But the library hungered for more stories, its presence growing ever closer. The library warped around her, reality bending until she could no longer tell where she ended and the story began. In a moment of desperation, Clara felt herself slipping deeper into the spell of the cursed book, shadows curling around her mind like tendrils of smoke. Just when despair threatened to claim her entirely, a familiar voice broke through the haze. Mark's voice, urgent and filled with emotion. "Clara, you have to fight it. Remember why you came here." The words echoed in her mind, piercing through the darkness that had ensnared her. Clara's heart raced as memories of their friendship flooded back, grounding her in reality. With a sudden surge of determination, she broke free from the clutches of the library, her hands trembling as she grasped the cursed book. In a fierce act of defiance, she hurled it into the nearby fireplace, the flames roaring to life as they consumed the pages. As the book ignited, a wave of energy surged through the library. The oppressive atmosphere began to lift, the shadows retreating as the oppressive weight that had burdened her eased. But in that moment of hope, Clara's heart sank. She turned to Mark, only to see him engulfed in darkness, his face twisted in horror as the shadows clawed at him, pulling him away. "Clara," he shouted, his voice a mixture of terror and disbelief, but it was too late. The library roared in protest, its structure groaning as if it were alive and writhing in pain. Clara watched helplessly as the darkness consumed Mark, his form vanishing into the depths of the library, leaving only echoes of his cries behind. No, Clara screamed, the pain of loss striking her like a physical blow. The library began to revert to its former state, shelves shifting back into place, and the air growing still. The shadows retreated, but the cost had been great. The whispers that had haunted her were silenced, but the loss of Mark left an emptiness that reverberated through her soul. As the library returned to its eerie calm, Clara stumbled backward, heart pounding, tears streaming down her face. The fireplace crackled with the remnants of the book, its ashes swirling into the air like lost dreams. She had escaped, but at a terrible price. The library, once a sanctuary of stories, now felt like a mausoleum of lost souls, with Mark's memory lingering in the air, a haunting reminder of the darkness that dwelled within. As the last echoes of Clara's cries faded into the oppressive silence, the library stood still, its malevolent energy momentarily quelled. The shadows lingered, whispering remnants of stories untold, but the air felt different now, charged with a sense of loss and an unyielding hunger. Clara staggered out, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had sacrificed. days turned into weeks. Yet the memory of Mark haunted her every step. The library's facade had crumbled, its secrets hidden beneath layers of dust, but she could still feel its eyes watching from the darkness. It was a hollow victory, though she had escaped its clutches. The void left by Mark's absence was unbearable. The town, once filled with whispers of the supernatural, now felt suffocated by a deeper silence, a warning to those who dared to enter. But the library was patient. It awaited the next curious soul, its hunger insatiable, its allure undiminished. As Clara moved on, attempting to reclaim her life, the building loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the twilight sky, its windows glinting like malevolent eyes. Then, on a fateful evening, a new visitor stepped through the creaking doors, oblivious to the tales of terror that surrounded the place. They felt the familiar chill in the air, the promise of knowledge calling them deeper into the stacks. And as the silence settled once more, a whisper echoed through the dusty shelves, "Welcome home. You will be one of us." As we reach the end of tonight's stories on Hauntales, it's time to let your mind drift away. Listen to the sound of the rain gently falling in the background. Let each drop calm your thoughts and ease you into a peaceful sleep. There's nothing to fear now, just the soothing rhythm of the rain. Focus on your breathing, let your body relax, and allow yourself to drift deeper into rest. Sleep peacefully, and we'll meet again tomorrow night for another story. Good night.